Hi class, Mrs. Calvi here. Quick review on adding and subtracting fractions. So you should know from elementary school if you have a common denominator, so in this case I have both of my denominators are 10, I'm just going to add or subtract my numerators depending on what type of problem it is. So here this one is pretty easy. 3/10 plus 1/10 is going to give me 4/10. One thing you have to remember, you must simplify down if it can be simplified. You lose points if you do not simplify. 4 and 10, I can simplify that down. I know they're both even. I can cut them in half. So if I cut 4 in half, I would get 2. If I cut 10 in half, I would get 5. And then 2/5 is a simplified answer. Okay? So common denominator, pretty simple. Let's just go over a subtraction one with a common denominator. And when they have a common denominator, writing them horizontally like this is fine. Typically, I always write fractions vertically. If I have 7/9 and I am subtracting 4/9, I have a common denominator. I'm going to just subtract my numerator. 7 minus 4 is 3, and I'm keeping my 9. This can be simplified down, though, so make sure we are simplifying. They are both divisible by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. My final answer would be 1/3 here. All right, so those are the simple ones when you have a common denominator already. So let's take a look at some that do not have a common denominator. Okay, so here I have 3/8 plus 5/12. Now in the assignment, they are going to be written horizontally. I automatically convert it vertically. So I have it going up and down to make it easier. So now I see I have an 8 for a denominator and a 12 for a denominator. I need to find a common denominator, okay? So it just so happens I know that 8 and 12 can both go into the number 24, all right? So I happen to know they both can go into 24. Now, let's say you could not think of a common denominator. You can always multiply your denominators. You could multiply 8 times 12, and then you could have that as a common denominator. So 12 times 8 or 8 times 12 is 96. You would then, of course, have to simplify down. So the smaller the common denominator you find, the quicker you will get to a simplified answer. Okay, so here, 12 times what gives me 24? 12 times 2, so that means I have to multiply my numerator here by 2 to get 10. 8 times 3 gives me 24, and then I have to multiply my numerator here by a 3 as well. 3 times 3 gives me 9, okay? So far, so good. So now I have a common denominator. I can just add my fractions. So I'm going to take the 9, I'm going to add it to the 10. I'm going to get 19 over 24. Remember, your denominator stays the same, okay? Now you would have to see, can I simplify 19/24? Well, it just so happens that cannot be simplified, so this would be your final answer, 19/24. Okay? All right, so here I have 1/10 minus 5/8. Again, I need to find a common denominator, looking to see what they both have in common. All right, so if I can't think of anything, I could do 10 times 8 and have 80, but I happen to know that they both have a common denominator of 40. I know they both can go into 40, so I'm going to use 40. So 8 times 5 gets me to 40. 5 times 5 gets me to 25. 10 times 4 gets me to 40, and 1 times 4 gives me 4. Okay, so right now I have 4 40ths minus 25 40ths. Okay, so this is where I have a problem, because I cannot take 25 from 4, all right? I cannot actually do this subtraction. So watch what I do. So being I can't take 25 away from 4, that's going to tell me that I'm going to have an answer that is negative. So I'm just going to take 25. I am then going to subtract 4. I know that my answer is going to be negative. So as I always tell you, if you know what your sign is going to be, put it so you don't forget it. So 25 minus 4 gives me 21 out of 40. So in this case, I have negative 21 40ths. Negative 21 40ths. Now, if I could simplify this, I would, but it just so happens I cannot simplify negative 21 out of 40. All right, so here I end up with a negative answer. All right, let's try one more. All right, so here I wrote it vertically because we do have a negative. Negative 2/3 plus 7/8. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what my sign needs to be, okay? So it gets a little bit trickier with fractions when you don't have a common denominator. So I have a negative and a positive. That means I'm going to be subtracting these two if this happens to be with two different signs. Now, figuring out which one is the larger number to take the sign, that's going to be the hard part. So watch what we do here. Okay, so I just rewrote this vertically to make it easier, and I did put my signs over here just so I remember that this is a negative and this is a positive. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with a common denominator the way I always do. So if I look at 3 and 8, I know that a common denominator between those two is 24. So 8 times 3 gives me 24, and then 7 times 3 gives me 21. 3 times 8 is 24, and 2 times 8 gives me 16. Okay, so now I have a common denominator. So here, now it's a little bit easier to see which sign, remember, signs are different. We are subtracting, taking the sign of the bigger number. Well, it just so happens that 21 24ths is larger than 16 24ths. So I already know I'm subtracting these two fractions, but I'm going to take the sign of the larger fraction, and this one happens to be a positive. So I know my final answer is going to be positive. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract these two fractions. In order to subtract, I'm going to take the 21 minus the 16, of course. So 21 minus 16 is going to give me 5. And then my denominator always stays the same. And I know that this is going to be a positive. And I cannot simplify 5/24, so that would be my final answer. So when you are adding fractions that have positive and negative integers, just line them up vertically, find their common denominator. Then what you're going to want to do is figure out what your sign is going to be. If these two signs were different, we knew we had to subtract, take the sign of the bigger number. 21 24ths is larger than 16 24ths, so my final answer for this one was positive. Then I just subtracted these two to get my final fraction. Okay? That is it for now, and I will talk to you guys soon.